And so just to give a little bit of background to people listening to.
Yes, it's the idea that the best solution to speech is not less speech, it's more speech. I would clarify that to mean, or I would clarify and say that, the solution to bad speech is not more speech, it's good speech. Good ideas, good conceptions. So I think that might be a difference between Candace and I here.
This, you appeared on Charlie Kirk's show, and you referred to me as anti-Semitic. Is that correct? Okay.
Not only that, Candace, I've actually written a couple of articles, one in November and one last week, about your anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Correct. And referring to that article that you wrote last week, published on March 9th, the heading reads, "Let's be honest, Candace Owens is a Jew-hating bigot." So that's very punchy, very strong language.
And that is very strong language. That kind of language is reminiscent of the kinds of things that I had experienced myself as a Catholic. Being a Catholic gamer that can't go along with moral depravity. And so people have thrown those terms at me simply because, not because I was engaging in ad hominem attacks and attacking people directly and stuff like that. It's simply because I had I follow Catholic sexual ethics and anthropology. And so when there's deviations from that, I can't go along with it. But for some people, the very fact that I can't go along with it is sufficient for them in their own minds to say I hate people, or I'm a bigot, or some other language. So I suspect that we're going to be getting a lot of that from the Rabbi. He's going to be talking like this. I certainly expect this from the left for sure if we don't conform. I think some of that comes from a kind of demand for our ideological conformity. If a person departs from that orthodoxy at all, they're called hateful or bigots. It's weird, actually.
And I want to actually go through this article point by point so that you can defend your position and say why you wrote this.
Candace, I think before that, and as I said, I'm very optimistic that you would have a dialogue about something. I think before that, there are some real steps.
It's just kind of interesting. He keeps using that language of being optimistic with dialogue, because what he ends up doing in this video is he thinks he has something to teach Candace, that Candace doesn't understand her anti-Semite sentiments, and he's here to teach her about what that means and what that is, because he thinks that she's been hurtful, and so that's kind of like his MO throughout the entirety of this. So that's not about dialogue per se, and he'll make that point, and I'll point it out when he does, that he's not really interested in dialogue. In fact, he's offended that dialogue does occur. What he's optimistic about is that he can change Candace's mind or help her to see something, which is once again weird. It's the idea of implicit bias, that he thinks that she has a bias, and he thinks that she is not fully aware of those biases, and he has something to teach her about that.
Which is, I have called you, and I'm not alone in this, many Jews have called you an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. I've also talked to people who say you have a really sweet heart, just so you know. You and I have a number of mutual friends in the world. But I think it's important to first identify what anti-Semitism is. It is a different type of hate than any other type of hate in the world.
I don't know if we could say this, that it's a different type of hate. Hopefully he goes on to explain that, because number one, it depends on what he means by hate and what he means by type, and also why he considers that to be so unique in history that especially if he thinks it's like the highest form, and people who are racist or who treat people with darker skin poorly, or even people who treat people with lighter skin poorly on such superficial characteristics and such, that somehow that's not as great or grave as other particular expressions of conflict that people have with one another.
And if you and I are speaking crossways because we have a different understanding and definition, that's not going to lead to any dialogue. That's not going to lead. Look, I said to Scott, I'd love to walk out of here and say, you know what, I was wrong, and write an article, I apologize, and I was wrong. But the first piece is to have a mutual understanding of what is anti-Semitism. I think that
it's very possible that they will not come to that conclusion, but that doesn't mean there can't be dialogue. See, he's almost talking as if the only way for us to have dialogue is not just to have a mutual understanding, but by mutual understanding isn't understanding the other person's point of view, it's having the same mutual conception. And only then does he think that dialogue is of value, whereas dialogue can occur without that. So I see two things wrong with what he just said.
That would help a tremendous amount.
I actually totally agree with you on that. That is a perfect place to start. Could you provide for us a definition of anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, because I think that is the break. If we're not speaking the same language, where can we go? Right?
Yeah. See, he wants her to speak his language so that he can draw her to his conclusions.
Right. So there's a man, a blessed memory man named Lord Jonathan Sachs. He was the chief rabbi of England. He had a great line. He really defined anti-Semitism. That anti-Semitism is Jews have no right to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as other human beings. It's kind of weird statements. Let's just track.
Well, who doesn't think that human beings don't have a right to come together and form government or share certain religious propositions, philosophical outlook, things like that. Obviously, if those ideas are bad, nobody really has a right to heresy. Nobody has a right to bad ideas. We have the capacity to have bad ideas, but we don't have a right to it per se. That's like parents saying that they have a right to raise their children with their Munchausen tendencies and stuff like that. At some point you do have to apply truth and morality to something and say, nope, you don't have a right to sin, you don't have a right to error. One might hold those things, one has the capacity to think such things, but we wouldn't say that there is a right to it per se, because rights ultimately come from God. They don't come from the state. They're not derived from human nature itself, even though some of that stuff's written into natural law and so on and so forth. So if it's not in accordance with God, who is righteous, it would be weird for us to say we have a right to depart from that. Right? That's a wrong conception of right.
Back to understand the history of anti-Semitism. 2,000 years ago, Jews don't accept Jesus as Messiah. For people who do not have faith, as the early Christians, as some of them have faith, some of them accept Jesus, but they don't really in their heart. And you and I both know people like Rob McCoy who accepts it fully in their heart, and other people who are doing it without faith. And those who have less faith, the fact that a Jew exists, let alone thrives, is a threat to their faith, because how can the Jew not accept Jesus as God and still thrive? Unless he's associated with the devil. So you start.
Well, this whole idea that the only way you can thrive is, or to experience positive outcomes in one's life, it isn't. I mean, that stuff could flow from good business sense, and one could be successful, have lots of money, maybe even have a healthy marriage, kids, a good career. So this whole idea that, these people over here are thriving, and that's kind of like the idea of somebody saying, hey, the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or those who follow Mary Baker Eddy and what they call Christian Science and so on and so forth, and all these other groups. Why would a group thrive, or why would they grow and have more numbers next year than they do this year? Is that at all evidence that God has blessed them, that God approves of them? No, that's a false conception. We can even see this in Job, where the idea that Job is going through a hard time, that he lost his family and his possessions and his health, that this was due to his sins and because he was aligning himself with the devil and stuff like that. So I don't know where the rabbi here gets this idea that there are, if there are people who wrongly think that people who don't thrive in life, now I'm not talking about human flourishing per se, such that they're completely in line with truth, but I am saying that there are basic elements of human nature that people could become really good at, that leads to a lot of positive outcomes, not absent of God, but in virtue of him and the natural gifts he has given to us and things according to our nature and so on and so forth. So it's kind of weird he's saying this.
Are having these myths that are created of the Jew being identified with the opposite of God.
Myths. Interesting idea. I wouldn't say that's a myth. I would say that from a Christian perspective, particularly 1 John, that, and even in the words of Jesus, if you reject the Son, you reject the Father. God has revealed himself and is not being accepted. I think that most Jews would say to someone who says, I follow the Abrahamic covenant. I believe God revealed himself to Abraham and gave us circumcision and the promise and all of this, but I don't accept Moses. If there was a person like that during that time, would the Jews who were following Moses look favorably upon one who was rejecting Moses? And likewise, people who follow Moses, well, if God has revealed himself through Christ, and one doesn't, they would be looked upon in the exact same way as, It's not a departure from what God had already revealed, but it's a resistance to things that God has revealed new. So if God revealed himself through Moses and somebody said, no, I followed the God of Abraham, I don't think God has revealed himself through Moses, wouldn't they be seen as ones that are rejecting God and what he's revealing here and now? Of course, that's exactly how they would look upon that. So I think it's just inherent within Christianity, when John says that those who reject the Son don't have the Father, they're not with God. It's part of the spirit of Antichrist, he says, which is already in the world. Are ideas that are opposed to the teachings of Christ part of the spirit of Antichrist? Of course. They oppose Christ. They reject Christ. Some are more morally culpable than others for doing that. Kind of reminds me of the so-called Protestants and Reformers. There isn't a single person today that's morally responsible for the things that occurred back in the 16th century. Children are being born and raised and within these various communities who don't bear the moral culpability of those things of those days. And it's likewise, I would say, those who were responsible for Jesus's rejection and death, choosing Barabbas, and calling for Jesus to be crucified and all of that. I mean, I wasn't there. Nobody alive today was there. It's a bit disconcerting when that woman cries out, may his blood be upon us and upon our children and our children's children. That this kind of laying a responsibility for the death of Christ, which he was supposed to die. He gave up his life. God in his foreknowledge knew and even utilized these kinds of things. It's Judas, who even after he betrayed Christ came to the realization that he had betrayed innocent blood, and he may not have been the only one who had this idea. And we can't say all Jews, all Pharisees, all members of the Sanhedrin, bear the same moral culpability for the things that occurred during that time. Obviously, if somebody doesn't believe Jesus is their Messiah as a Jew, obviously there's going to be tons of implications concerning that matter, right?
This really codifies in 1144 in Norwich, England, what's called the blood libel. This is really important to understand, especially today in 2024. In 1144, a young boy is killed, and the local priest says that's because the Jews need to make their matzah with Christian blood. It's called the blood libel. It's blame the problems of other people on the Jew. It's just so you know, that's...
What was the historical context? Was a Jew involved in killing that young boy?
That's so ridiculous, not only just on its face, but we're forbidden from even having meat that has any blood in it. This is a Torah law. You can't have...
What he's saying here is ridiculous. He's given some sort of defense as if the language of blood is literal as opposed to employing a literal device. So I'm not even sure why he goes there, because he's responding to a misunderstanding of that language. Like, why?
That's why we can't have state charge. Okay, so this gets perpetuated in combination with a 4th century, what's called the Vulgate.
I'm sorry, did you say in 1140 this happened?
1144 in Norwich, England.
Okay.
This is after, in the 4th century, you have something called the Vulgate. The Vulgate is the official translation of the Bible. In Hebrew, there's no vowels, and the person who translates Saint Jerome, who translates the Vulgate, knows what he's doing is translating wrong. He puts down that when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, he has horns. Okay, Karen, when actually the word was Karan, meaning that light shone from his head. So now, by 1144, you have the anti-Semitic myth of Jews have horns and they drink blood. And
well, first of all, Jerome was not anti-Semitic. In fact, he consulted a lot of rabbis in his translations, even so much so that he was influenced by their conception of the Old Testament canon. Whereas he didn't want, or at least it seemed like he didn't want to translate the deuterocanonical text from the Greek. But this charge given to Jerome as if, he purposely did this because he wanted to make Jews look bad, say they have horns. I would probably venture to say that the parallel of using the idea of horns or using the idea of light shining from his face or something like that had more to do with authority. The symbolism. So what is the symbolism, easy Google check here, of horns in the Bible? Just something very basic. Horns symbolize God's strength on earth, honor, or victory. The horns of the righteous are exalted while the horns of the arrogant are cut down. The raised horn is a common biblical symbol of victory, especially of being rescued from oppression. In Psalm 148, the psalmist writes, praise the name of Yahweh, for he has lifted up the horn of his people. So if people see, he's laying the charge at the feet of Jerome, whereas it would be odd for a Christian to speak ill of Moses, particularly when they believe Jesus to be a prophet like Moses. To conceptualize Moses as being like demonic or devilish or something like that. So I can imagine this is more of just something that somebody did and popularized as a kind of attack against the Jews, which would be this would be a weird thing to lay at the to put this charge against Moses himself, because that's not something that Christians do, because Moses was doing what God told him to do, and according to the revelation that God was willing to give at that time, in accordance with his historical context. So this is actually kind of weird. This should not be laid at the feet of Jerome.
I know people who've been asked when they went into the army and other places, can I see your horns? So this still exists today in 2024 throughout America. And I don't mean just in little rural areas.
I will say that I absolutely have never heard this before.
It exists today, these myths. That Vulgate Bible is the official Catholic Bible all the way through the 1970s. So
it still is. It was elevated at the Council of Trent. It's never been anything less than what the church has said that it is. But here he's kind of making a kind of anti-Catholic. See, here's the interesting thing. He's on here calling Candace an anti-Semite, but here he is making this anti-Catholic charge. This idea of laying this guilt at the feet of Jerome, who is highly influenced by rabbis and was constantly in converse with them. So what he's actually conveying sounds like a myth, an anti-Catholic myth.
it is, you need to understand that that's a piece of it, okay? That they're equated with this kind of hate. Because it's about Jews not having the right to exist collectively, when they live in their little communities in the Middle Ages, anti-Semitism is a hate against their religion. By the time you get to the 18th and 20th centuries, when so many Jews have assimilated, they are in culture, they are in arts, they're in science, it's no longer against them for their religion, it's against...
Though I highly doubt that, that somehow, I have differences with Jewish theology. I don't accept it. And it doesn't matter to me whether they're in arts or enculturated or that sounds kind of weird. Does that mean that they're rejecting their religion and now following this, marrying themselves to the spirit of the age? I'm not quite sure exactly what that means, except that if somebody disagrees with a philosophical proposition proposed from Jewish theology, and one takes issue with that because it is part of Spirit of Antichrist, what then, why would somebody change that? I think that critique continues to exist and will continue to exist.
Against them for their race. Because anti-Semitism is the oldest hate in the world, and the hate that mutates.
It's the oldest hate in the world. Oldest hate in the world. I don't know what is meant by hate here.
In 1948, because remember, it says Lord Sachs...
Oh, I just want to pause it. You said it's a hate that mutates.
Correct.
So your belief then is that the definition of anti-Semitism can necessarily change. Is that correct?
It's not just my belief. It is the commonly accepted understanding in both the Jewish and academic worlds.
All right, so what they're getting into here, and Candace is not... The idea of what is anti-Semitic should be an objective standard that doesn't change. And this is obviously true, because if a group gets to decide for themselves that the definition can change, that's problematic. Because then people are attacking me for being anti-LGBT, right? Based on whatever definition that they want to utilize. So there needs to be an objective standard as to exactly what that means. What he is talking about, and unfortunately I don't think the definition really changes, all right? Because we're talking about an objective reality. Now, that can express itself in different ways, and that's fine. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. That's not a change in definition. That's a change in application. And so they're going to talk past each other here.
Okay.
This isn't, okay? As I said, that's why I quoted, this is a quote. It's a great thing from Lord Sachs, Jonathan Sachs. It's a great thing from Nihilecka. This is just accepted as understanding of, a cultural
Okay,
anthropologist.
By whom? Once again, it has to be an objective definition that could be applied to people against other people groups universally.
I would just say off the bat, I do not accept that definitions can just mutate. That is something
Right.
that I could debate that on, like
She's
the
right.
definition of a woman. I mean, and I'm saying not just about Jewish people. I think that we have to have a concrete definition to work with, because then you can
Correct.
just update and say, actually, I've changed that, and now this is what constitutes
Candace?
anti-Semitism.
Right, absolutely.
But Candace, that is the horror of anti-Semitism.
No, it isn't. He wants to be able to, and others to, change the definition. I'm perfectly fine with part of his argument that the way that people are targeted, the application, or the way that people treat other people on what basis and whatnot, that can certainly shift as one becomes more predominantly than the other. But I don't think it ever changes completely where as if somehow nobody no longer has doctrinal issues. You know what I mean? The doctrinal critique will continue to exist, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. So I know what she's saying, and I agree with her that an objective standard has to exist and be universally applied. His idea of, well, Jews just get to redefine what bigotry is against them, and if you don't agree with that, then that's being anti-Semitic, which, if he's just talking about application and somebody's turning a blind eye to how a Jew could be variously discriminated, various aspects of them could be critiqued, then I get that point. But he seems to be conflating the two, or even at worse, as saying that no, you can't have an objective standard, because as soon as you have an objective standard, then targeting of Jews is not unique anymore, and it has to be the most hateful form of racism and bigotry and so on and so forth. And if you don't agree with their changing definitions of it, then that's what makes you an anti-Semite. I reject his argumentation here.
So what you are saying to me is that anti-Semitism is this and does not change.
Correct.
What I am saying to you is that the entire world and scholars about anti-Semitism recognize that it is a unique hate.
It is a unique hate. This is the very first time I've ever heard anybody make a claim to a unique hate. Because I'm used to this kind of rhetoric from, like BLM and, white privilege and stuff like that people with darker skin are, it's the worst form of hate and bigotry and so on and so forth. I've never heard anybody make the claim that Jews are attacked more than other people. So the universal standard is just people attacking other people on the basis of very superficial criteria, like racism, for instance. But yeah, I've never heard anybody make the claim that any of the discrimination that they experience in their personal life is always greater and worse and more ancient than any other form of discrimination that could exist throughout all time in history. I've never heard that claim. That could be very offensive to the ears of people who aren't Jews, religiously or ethnically, who have experienced discrimination of various kinds. That could be very offensive to them. But like I said, this is the first time I ever heard anybody make this particular claim.
That if you define it as that Jews should not be able to exist collectively, as a collective, they shouldn't have that right. That changes from the Middle Ages with religion, the 18th through 20th centuries about race, and then after Israel's created, it's a hatred based on the nation. And until that's...
So once again, you're just talking about the application here. The objective standard of what he's referring to doesn't change. And I could see Candace's, facial expressions here. She doesn't quite understand what he's trying to say, because he's conflating definitions and applications. And applications can change, but if he's conflating them, then he's going to say definitions could change. And she makes the distinction. So in her mind, there is an objective standard. It does not change. Its application could change. So this is why they're having a hard time talking to each other, because he doesn't make the distinction. She does. And she's right to make that distinction.
Until that is understood, that it is, this isn't something that's really questioned about among academics, theologians, Jewish scholars. I'm not presenting it. This is why I thought that I'm so optimistic about a dialogue. But I think part of it is you view that the hate can't mutate. And what I'm trying to tell you is that we have 2,000 years of history that demonstrate the exact opposite.
See, once again, when he said that the hate mutates, okay, he's talking about the application. So I don't know who these scholars are or theologians he's talking about, but they're certainly correct about application. But he's saying that because in his mind the application and the definition is synonymous, that if you reject the changing of the definition, you're rejecting the different applications. And so what he's thinking that she's not getting is that if the definition is this one specific thing, such as, like in his mind, you're only critiquing the Jew for his theology. So it's not anti-Semitic to attack a Jew for his ethnicity. And so if that's not part of the definition, then she is just allowing for, or she doesn't allow anything. That's weird language. I don't know why people use it. Seems to be very influential, popped up in my mind, that one could attack a Jew for their ethnicity and say, oh, this isn't bigotry. This is a very similar thing that people use from like BLM and stuff like that, and saying that, a person with darker skin can't be racist against white people, for instance. And so they're just, because they're defining it a certain way, they justify their own hatred and bigotry and against quote unquote whiteness. I've seen some horrific depictions of racism coming from people of all ethnicities. It can and does happen. So that's what his issue is. But once again, all of this has to do with that distinction between an objective moral standard or definition of people being attacked for one reason or another, just people being attacked, and then there's the way in which they are attacked, the application, how that's applied to changing circumstances. So it's kind of a dumb conversation. She's right with the distinctions. He doesn't understand them. I don't, like I said, I don't know who these theologians are, but they're definitely not me. I would draw this distinction, and it wouldn't be anti-Semitic to do it. It's just applying logic and drawing a distinction between words.
So, and I'm gonna just push back just gently here. For me personally, if I thought that racism could just be an ever-shifting definition based on the experience of Black people, it would be a remarkable power, and I would be able to create something like BLM, which could say that everything was racist. So I am not going to be able to agree that definition should be able to transform according to what's happening during the day. But here's what I will say. If you could, just because I think it's really important for us to get to going through this article, because then you might be able to explain why you view it as anti-Semitism. If you could just give us what you are saying the current definition of anti-Semitism is today, that would be very helpful.
The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are. It has to do with anti-Zionism, number one. That is a definition. Anti-Zionism, anti-Israel is anti-Semitism.
Okay.
This is.
So if what he means by being pro-Israel, for instance, it's one of those circumstances that if you're not pro something, you're against it, and therefore you're a bigot. You know, if I'm not an ally, if I'm not pro-LGBT, you know, then I'm against it. I'm an oppressor. I'm anti-trans. You know, all of that language that's thrown around. Yeah, I would be fine with different language to describe it, whereas I'm pro-Catholic teaching, and anything that contradicts it is not something I'm going to be able to support. That's a better expression, you know. Anti-leprechaun, yeah. If you don't think that there are, I think once we draw certain distinctions and we change the rhetoric a little bit, things usually come out much better, because like if I'm pro-life, all right, that's my ethic. I don't think people should be killing their offspring. They'll say, oh, it's just a fetus. Well, that's just a word for offspring. So I don't, at that point it's the distinction between denotation and connotation. For some people, connotation of fetus is something to be distinguished from person or baby or something like that, but the word itself just simply denotes offspring. That's exactly what it is. It's not a chicken, it's not a cat, it's not a dog, it's human in one form versus another form, because there's development. So the language that people employ and the definitions that they use makes a really big difference. So when he is characterizing this as, well, if you're not pro-Israel, now I think I could kind of see what he's saying, that if people say, well, I don't think the Jews should have their own nation. You know, I can't agree to like a two-state solution or something like that. And just say, no, that they can't have their own nation. Well, what makes them any different than any other peoples out there who form nations and boundaries and borders and laws and so on and so forth? I certainly have no problem with Germany or Sweden. I certainly wouldn't have any problems with any nation, you know, being a nation and so on and so forth. So it's not a unique thing. It would be like somebody saying, you know, the Germans shouldn't have their own nation. But this would be, I suppose, in one sense, if it seems to be a unique circumstance where the person who is saying that Israel shouldn't exist, you know, those people shouldn't be able to form their own nation, have their own state, stuff like that, and they're never saying that about anybody else anywhere else, then yeah, I can see how that could be unique. And then we would have to ask ourselves, well, why is that unique? Why is that seem to be the case? And then that would be along the rabbi's argument that it's only because these particular people don't have a right to a nation state. You know, and that would be racist. You know, so he's certainly right about that. Yeah. So I get that. I accept that. I certainly recognize that. You know, I am familiar with people saying those sorts of things, and I never hear people say, you know, South Africa shouldn't exist, you know, or I suppose wars are often fought concerning these particular matters. Perhaps with Ukraine, for example. You know, maybe there's Russians that say, well, Ukraine shouldn't exist as its own separate and distinct country, which is why, you know, Vladimir, you know, ostensibly trying to kind of reassemble the Soviet Union and going and taking those lands back to be subsumed under the Russian authorities. So like with, is it Crimea? Crimea? I might not be, I forget. Georgia, Ukraine, these kinds of invasions. The Prussians. It is Crimea, okay. And so there's these attempts. So so this wouldn't necessarily be a unique thing, per se. I guess now that I'm thinking about it, Russia doesn't want Ukraine to exist as its own separate nation, and those people don't have a right to those lands because historically there's land disputes, you know. Yeah, and I suppose, and land switches hands a lot, you know, a lot. You know, when the Roman Empire came in, prior to that, Alexander the Great. Before that, you know, you got the Assyrian Empire, you got the Persian Empire, you got the Babylonian Empire, the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadian, Phoenician, and don't forget Zur and the Khodan Armada, right? Absolutely can't forget that in this discussion. The Arab Empire. Yeah. People, the Huns as well. Yeah. So it's not a unique thing for people to dispute about land. So if, for instance, there's the dispute, this actually goes way back to what we see in the Old Testament with the conquests and taking the promised land, and killing the men, women, and children, and livestock, and the sort, to displace the people who are living there. And so, this was, the Israelites doing this, and because they believed from Abraham that this land is promised to them. And then you have Mongolians, to go and take that land. So if the people who descend from that, who say, hey, this is my land, you took this land from me, whether, the Israelites claim that God had given that land to them, and that's clearly laid out in the Old Testament. The displacing of people from lands, you no longer have a right to live here, kind of thing, is something that the Israelites themselves had imposed upon people. So it's not a unique thing, but I will say that when it comes to those disputes, I know there's probably a lot of Muslims, for example, who don't really care for Israel being its own state and so stuff like that because of ancient land disputes that continue to our day. So if a person kind of, has the perspective, oh, the Israelites committed genocide against the Canaanites, and the Philistines and all of these folks and all these different peoples in that land, and then demand that people who aren't Jewish, who don't follow the Old Testament, who don't believe God has revealed himself, that land was specifically promised to Abraham and his descendants, would look at this and say, no, they shouldn't have that land. It's kind of like people who say, well, we have to give, Mount Rushmore back to a particular Indian tribe, for instance. It's the same kind of thing, I mean, people take land. People fight over resources. This has always been the case, and the arguments always go, well, who would you give the land back to? Are we going to displace Jews from Israel because they took the land from the Canaanites? Are we going to, send all descendants of European settlers back to Europe? So I guess I kind of started off here reflecting on this, thinking, well, I mean, I do hear in the news quite a bit about, anti-Israel Muslims specifically because they have claim to land and stuff. But now that I'm reflecting on it, there's tons of examples going back to ancient land disputes that isn't unique per se. Obviously, the Russian claim to Ukraine, for example, would be more modern, not having the same history going back to the Old Testament. It's much more ancient. That the present state of Israel, could be seen as a remnant of 6, 7, 8,000 years of land disputes. So I mean, it's not a unique phenomenon among humans, but it certainly is, from what I can think of, the most ancient of disputes that continue to exist to this day. I'll continue because we have quite a bit of time, but I like to slowly reflect on things.
So you believe that Jewish people can be anti-Semitic?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. So when you see a gathering of Jewish people who say, I'm Jewish, but I don't support Israel or Bibi Netanyahu, you say that person can be anti-Semitic.
You just did two different things and was very anti-Zionism, number one, Semitism.
Okay.
This isn't
so you believe that Jewish people can be anti-Semitic?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when you see a gathering of Jewish people who say, I'm Jewish, but I don't support Israel or Bibi Netanyahu, you say that person can be anti-Semitic.
You
see, he's going to contradict what he seemed to have said before, because here he's saying that, oh yes, Jews can be racist against other Jews, and when she says, oh okay, so what if you have some Jews who aren't pro-Israel? And he's like, oh no, you can't do that. But earlier he made it very plain that anti-Semitism was now in its most recent form of application, that's not his language, that's mine, was that the Jews don't have a right to the state of Israel. So I have no idea what he's saying now, because he seems to be kind of pivoting, because he doesn't I don't know what he's doing.
Did two different things and was very you just did two different things that were totally unrelated, Candace.
That's not true. He said they were related.
You said that Jews that do not support Israel.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you said Jews that do not support Bibi Netanyahu.
I'm just saying that because he's the current prime minister. So I'm saying, like,
that's fair. That's fair. I mean, now there can be a distinction. I could be pro-America, but I don't like Biden. All right, I get that. We can have that distinction, but I don't think that's how he framed it originally. Or I don't think that's how Candace had framed it. I think she mentioned pro-Israel. Here, let me go back.
Okay.
You said that Jews anti-Zionism, number one. That is a definition. Anti-Zionism, anti-Israel is anti-Semitism.
Okay.
This isn't
so you believe that Jewish people can be anti-Semitic?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when you see a gathering of Jewish people who say, I'm Jewish, but I don't support Israel or Bibi Netanyahu.
Or, did you hear that? So she's not conflating the two. She's using a disjunction. She's saying that if you don't support Israel at all, which he doesn't seem to respond to at all. He just gets hung up on treating it as an and, as opposed to. So it seems like if somebody doesn't support, it is altogether different. They are different, which is why she used the disjunction. So I'll let her talk for herself. Maybe she makes my point.
So you say that person can be anti-Semitic.
You just did two different things and was very. You just did two different things that were totally unrelated, Candace.
Okay.
You said
They're not unrelated. They are related, but that they're not the same.
that you said that Jews that do not support Israel,
Yes.
and you said Jews that do not support Bibi Netanyahu.
I'm just saying that because he's the current
Okay.
prime minister. So I'm saying like if they say
No,
I don't support.
no, this is where you're missing the point.
Okay.
I'm going to go on.
She really didn't give anything of substance other than she said, "Hey, the or, right? So he needs to treat this as two different things. But the thing is he's seeing two different things, but he's not really addressing her question at all. Address the first part before the disjunction, and then address the question after. Is he going to say that yes, Jews can be? There are Jews that aren't pro-Israel, and there are Jews that aren't pro-Netanyahu. Okay, let's talk about those two things. Can those things occur? You know, maybe one fits his definition of being an anti-Semite, which he already admitted that Jews can be anti-Semites, which, yep, you know, everybody could be a racist, even against themselves. It's sad, actually.
Following premise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to go under the premise that you care about people. You and I don't know each other, but I'm going to go under that premise. I'm going to go under the premise that you have no desire to ever hurt anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
To define never hurt anybody, because people's feelings get hurt all the time simply because we don't have the same thoughts in our head.
That's the premise I'm coming into this dialogue with. You have been devastatingly hurtful, and I think that I'm going to go from that. You don't understand what it means to the Jewish world.
Yeah, I remember hearing a lot of this when I just wanted Retro Craze to be gaming only. Chambers, you have no idea just how hurtful you're being. You know, you've hurt our feelings. You're not pro-LGBT, and that makes our feelings hurt so much. You don't understand. You know, or I see you're either a monster and you're demonized, or they say, oh, he just has to be ignorant. Here, let me teach you about how your words have hurt us. Like, what are you talking about? I'm allowed to be a Catholic. You know, if there's anything under heaven, you know, if there's anything under heaven that I have a right to, it's to God and the things of God. You know, yeah, tough crap, right? Just F off, you know, kind of attitudes like, hey, you know, I don't have the same thoughts in my mind as you. For some reason that makes you uncomfortable, or it makes you have feelings that you'd prefer not to have. Well, guess what? Welcome to the world. You know, we got to take off the bubble wrap. There are going to be people who don't have the exact same thoughts in your mind, in their mind, as they are in yours. This is what I experience, but they don't care about that. You know, that they say, Chambers, you've been so hurtful to these people. I'm like, oh yeah, and you don't think I feel anything about people attacking me and demonizing me? And you know, I mean, all that's justified, right? Because it's not being done in a vacuum. It's being done in response to their own hurtful emotions. They think they have a right to it. You know, they think, oh, I had this twinge of emotion that I didn't like feeling. So I'm going to make this other person over there feel even worse. And I'm morally justified in doing that. No. But this whole like kind of facade he's taking. Oh, Candace, I know you like people. You don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But you know what? Feelings have been hurt. And guess what? I'm here to educate you and, re-educate you and help you understand. I mean, she hasn't said anything that I find remotely offensive at all. I mean, from a biblical standpoint, anyone who doesn't accept the Son is part of the spirit of Antichrist. Okay. Does that mean that, everybody in the world, including Jews who don't accept God's Son, is part of the spirit of Antichrist? Yeah. That's the biblical teaching. That's part of, the thought process of Catholics and Christians and from 2,000 years ago. Is that anti-Semitic? Depends on how you use that word. Would my words be hurtful? How else am I supposed to convey biblical content other than simply saying it? I'm not being mean about it. A lot of people don't really understand Jesus. They don't understand a New Testament revelation. And even if they do, there's a lot of people who, they're not rejecting Christ out of like malice. They maybe just don't find it convincing at the present time, or they're what's the word I'm looking for? Sincere about their convictions. A lot of people have sincerity, and obviously, if a Jew, a religious Jew, came to me and said, I don't think that Jesus is the Messiah. Therefore, he's not God, and because I am treating him as God, that this is very offensive to God. I'm a blasphemer. You can just lay it all out. Well, that's exactly what all Jews think. All of them. Is that anti-Catholic? Am I mad about that now? Am I if a Jew says that, am I hurt and devastated, and should the Jew have to tell the Catholic Church, hey, I'm so sorry, I hurt all your feelings. I said this thing that I believe, and your feelings are hurt. All of that just seems really weird to me. Of course, Jews think I'm a blasphemer. All Jews think I'm a blasphemer. Because I'm saying that God became incarnate, and this Jesus guy was God incarnate. And so, yeah, to all Jews, I'm a blasphemer. I get it. I'm not hurt by it. That's their understanding of God and God's revelation. Like I said, I'm not hurt by it. Is it anti-Christian? Well, see, this is just really weird language that people seem to employ, It's like somebody... So, like, let's say somebody holds to the philosophical proposition that there isn't a God, and then you have another guy who holds to the proposition that there is a God. Is the atheist an anti-theist simply because he doesn't think that there's a God? Does it make him anti-theist? How is that language or rhetoric saying something to us about him? Now, are they only using that language if you're mean to a person on the basis of holding to contrary propositions? You know, is that like inherently mean? Of course not. It's not. Could you be mean to people on the basis of it? Some people could be, you know. There's a lot of anti-Catholic rhetoric, and yeah, blasphemer. So it makes me wonder what is even meant by some of this stuff, because if I say, well, all Jews are anti-Catholic, you know, what could I possibly mean by saying that? Now, normally I just say, you know, non-Christians, you know, are part and influenced by the spirit of Antichrist. They reject Christ. They reject the revelation through Jesus, the incarnation, and all of that stuff. But I suppose that there is something different when you put the word anti in front of something. Like an anti-theist, you know, if one were to draw a distinction between like an atheist who simply holds to certain philosophical positions and anti-theist, perhaps anti-theist in this sense could be applied to people like Richard Dawkins, you know, who uses a rhetoric that is very distasteful. But if somebody were to apply anti-theist to the atheist simply because he holds to the proposition there isn't a God, but he's not being mean about it, that's just in his intellectual journey, that's what he finds most convincing at the present time. Do you slap the word anti in front of that? You know what I mean? He seems to be saying that. He seems to be saying that as long as you don't hold to the same propositions he does, then that makes you anti something, you know, as opposed to, you know, it's weird, you know, it almost seems like anti is thrown in front of things if somebody wants to say that you're actively through your actions or attitudes are treating people a particular way that is uncharitable. Maybe that's what how people are using that. Like if I'm pro-life, you know, does that mean I'm anti-choice? You know, or if I'm called anti-choice, is that simply because I'm pro-life and I follow the teachings of the Catholic Church, and that's sufficient for their use of it? Or are they claiming that I'm mean to pregnant women who are scared and who are contemplating ending their pregnancies for convenience or comfort? When it comes to this kind of language, it's hard to discern exactly what is being said, because if he's saying that Candace is anti-Jew, I mean, he's yet to demonstrate that reality here at all. Divide and conquer tactics. I think part of it comes from that people speak from their perspectives. So, for example, am I anti-Protestant when I say that who they call reformers were revolutionaries, and they didn't start a reformation, they started a revolt from the church, and that these people didn't reform anything, they deformed doctrine? Am I being mean? Am I being anti-Protestant? Or am I just sharing the perspective from inside of the church, that these people were protesting the Mass, they were revolting and they were crafting their own versions of Christianity, which were subpar because they diverged from Catholic teaching, which is the fullness of truth. So, am I being mean? Am I being anti-Protestant when I simply make these observations from a Catholic perspective? Is it uncharitable? Is the rhetoric too strong? Is it offensive? Well, I don't think that. I suppose it would be similar to somebody who is a Protestant who looks at the church as the whore of Babylon, for example. When they say the Pope is the Antichrist, the Eucharist is the worship of bread, and this is blasphemous and sacrilegious, and they go off on that tangent. Well, I mean, from their perspective, if they think the church has become fully corrupted and there was a great apostasy, and that all of these doctrines are wrong and erroneous, and the church went off the rails, are they anti-Catholic for holding that perspective? I mean, as a Protestant, that they obviously do hold to some of those things. Pope is the Antichrist and stuff. So it's like, would I call it anti-Catholic? I would say, propositionally, they're not saying anything wrong. They're simply explaining the interpretation of reality from their perspective. And I wouldn't blame them for doing that. They're just working towards cogency, right? They're just being consistent with their own worldview. But I think maybe where it'd be more appropriate to use anti-language is that when you're just simply mean to people, right? You're just mean to people for holding a different idea than you do. And it comes out as uncharitable and as vitriol and malicious and condescending. I think maybe that would be a more appropriate language. Like, if I were to use that language, then Richard Dawkins, for example, is doing more than just espousing atheism, right? He's not just trying to develop a philosophical argument for why he thinks naturalism is a better philosophical position to hold, but rather he says very malicious things, right? And he doesn't have to be uncharitable. So maybe that's where the word anti comes in, when people slap that onto a word. That might be more appropriate use to it. But if somebody slaps, like if I were to say a Protestant is anti-Catholic simply because they're describing their interpretation of the church from within the context of their own worldview, I wouldn't be offended by that. I understand that they're trying to be intellectually consistent, right? They want to have a cogent worldview, and so they're describing their understanding of the interpretation of reality that they have. I wouldn't say that's anti-Catholic, because it's not being done maliciously. They're just being honest with themselves, and they're being honest with you. You know what I mean? But I'm fine with people having dialogue, free exchange of ideas, developing mutual understanding. That doesn't mean that we come to understand the same thing. It means that we come to understand our respective positions, which is why I was able to describe the way that a Protestant may interpret the Catholic Church, for instance. And I can describe the Catholic Church's perspective on the revolts that occurred by the revolutionaries in the 16th century. But I think it really has to do with whether or not there's charity there or not. Charity just means that people are intrinsically valuable and respectable. Certain ideas may not be respectable. So people certainly get it wrong. If you say, well, if you don't respect my ideas, you don't respect me. I'm like, well, I can't necessarily respect a person's thought if I don't think that thought is respectable, right? Or valuable. There does exist bad ideas. Nobody quibbles about that reality. There are bad ideas. We disagree on what ideas are bad. That's a totally different question. But yeah, I think being charitable means that we respect the dignity of the other person. Not that their ideas are dignifiable, but the intellectual journey, the intellectual process, the time and effort that a person puts forth applying their reason to content and thinking through propositions and such. There's an inherent dignity to that process. We have this capacity, this intellectual capacity. That's fine. That's all well and good. But unless we draw those kinds of distinctions, things that I say might not make a whole lot of sense. Right?
Mm-hmm. There's a great teaching that comes out of every sociologist, every person in academics, is that I don't get to tell a black man if he's experiencing racism. Mm-hmm. He knows. I don't get to tell you if you're experiencing misogyny. You know.
Does she?
If I make a comment and it's misogynistic, and you say, Rabbi, that was really misogynistic, my job is to say, wow, I didn't mean that.
No. Subjective experiences can be wrong and wrongly interpreted. We hear stories like this. Perhaps you guys have heard the story of Michelle Obama. She was standing in line to get ice cream or something like that, and somebody cut in front of her, and immediately, oh, this has nothing to do with my politics. This has nothing to do with whether or not they like my husband as the president and his policies or anything like that. It's instantly, oh, they did this because I'm black. Did you ask them about that? Yeah, imagine basing your worldview on subjective experiences. So he's wrong here. People can be incorrect. They can misinterpret, misunderstand. Some people can really have a lens where they have a victim mentality and everything is interpreted as against them, and it gets filtered through. It's only because of this particular reason, like the ice cream story. People can get things wrong. And so if they get it wrong and they misunderstand, that's not a moment for them to teach me about what's racist or what's bigotry, what's discrimination, because objectively they're just wrong. So it doesn't matter to me if a person, like, listen, I've been married for 20 years. I could tell you there's so many times that I've said something and it's despite the content or the delivery, I've had to, what I said was just simply misunderstood. My intent, the content, everything. And if they said, okay, let's sit down, this is a teaching moment, you hurt my feelings, you have to listen. Be like, what are you talking about? I didn't mean what you said that I meant. So no, I don't have anything to apologize for. You took me the wrong way. That's on you. I could be charitable and I could be helpful and be nice, but it's not a teaching moment for me. It's a teaching moment for the person who got it wrong. So this is a weird thing he's saying.
Apologize. That's not what I meant. And you do not get the right to say what is anti-Semitic or Jew hatred.
No, sorry. I'm not trying to. I don't think I said.
It's kind of interesting for any people group, and I get it. People live in community and stuff like that, but I also have a hard time with this language of being overgeneralizing and putting all people into this neat little package as if there's a monolith things for a certain people who say, oh, I'm part of this community or whatnot. They get to decide what is and is not bigotry, for example. Well, what if collectively they agree that if anybody disagrees with us, and they don't bow the knee, they don't there is an ideological conformity with groupthink, that this is bigotry, that this is discrimination. What if collectively they agreed to that? So not only would they have a subjective interpretation, now they have a erroneous objective standard as well too. And so if that's wrong, well, we can discuss ideas, so yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't see where he's coming from. I don't because, like I said, somebody could be wrong about their interpretation of a subjective experience, and they could have a skewed conception in their mind about what something is. This happens a lot. Welcome to the world of human beings. Ignorance exists, misunderstandings exist, bad ideas exist, and so for him to say that only a particular group of people get to decide for themselves what is or is not bigotry against them is highly problematic, because they could be in error both subjectively and objectively.
Said anything about me having the right. I just said to you, would you then view, because I did host somebody who was Jewish, Dave Smith, on my show, and I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's a comedian, he's a libertarian, he is not pro-Zionist. So I'm just asking you for clarity, because you're saying that you can't dismiss a Jewish person, but aren't you thereby dismissing Jewish people who say that I don't support Israel as a state? I'm just trying to have you answer that question.
And the answer is, I will ask you back the same question. Mm-hmm. Are there blacks who do not support blacks? Are there pick the cause or the minority who do not support or not, or actually are even better? You and I both sit on the conservative side politically. We share that, right? And we face the same way when it comes to that. And we both, I think, are disappointed in those who are Republicans in name only, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does that mean they're not Republicans?
Well, I wouldn't describe a race as a political ideology, like a political party. That's very different. So to say that you can't be a race, like you're not black.
So is he answering the question that, yeah, there can be a person who's ethnically Jew who doesn't support the state of Israel? Is he answering this by framing this way? I mean, some people may go as far as to say, if a person's Republican by name only, I mean, that language implies that they aren't Republican substantially, right? They ran on the ticket as Republican. That's the word that is next to their name. They got that R there. But if there isn't the substance, right, of what the political. See, it's very weird because the political right is usually much more divided amongst themselves, right? So you have the more traditional conservatives, you have the libertarians. For instance, I'm not libertarian, so I could disagree with libertarians on particular policy issues. Does that mean that they're not part of the Republican Party? No, they're part of the Republican Party. You have to, you gotta take it all, warts and all. All the people, and even what I think are bad policy decisions. So perhaps he's answering that question by saying, yeah, sure, there's a lot of ethnic Jews that don't support the nation of Israel. But the thing is every single time she tries to get him to say, well, yeah, but isn't that being an anti-Semite? Because that's the definition that he used earlier, right? To try to get him to say explicitly, yes, that guy that you just described, that Jew there, he's an anti-Semite. She's trying to get him to say that, but every single time she tries to work these different angles, he doesn't just come out and say it. Well, just say it.
If you don't support this is different than, like, you're basically saying that a Jewish person can be anti-Semitic. So that would be like saying a black person can, in fact, be racist towards, or they're not black.
Look, I'm not going to comment on black community.
Mm-hmm.
I will say there are plenty of self-hating Jews.
Okay, so you do believe, that's all I was trying to get you to say, is that Jewish people...
You see, even in this language, self-hating Jews, they're not only hating themselves then, but it depends on what is meant by hate here too. That's the thing. Are there Jews who are racist against other Jews? Can he say this? He should be able to say it.
People who don't support Israel, you are saying they are anti-Semitic. I just want to understand that.
Yeah. I'm saying it very clearly. They are self-hating Jews. Let's use that term very specifically. And you need to understand why they are self-hating Jews. And you need to understand, as numerous people have talked about, I've written about, Prager's talked about, Gorka's talked about, Levin's talked about, a number of people have talked about, Shapiro's talked about, and as I say, I've written about, is that people want to assimilate. For 2,000 years, Jews have been persecuted, and so they want to assimilate. And so many have converted from Judaism, not to another religion, but to leftist politics. That becomes their religion. Okay. And they lose their identity. That is a reality. So.
Yeah, but is that they lose their identity? They lose their identity. Who? So if I was born in Jerusalem, do I simply absorb certain identifying, self-defining concepts and characteristics? I suppose if somebody wanted to, or at least they could say in their early formation they were shaped to think a thing or two. Yes, Muck, you're awesome. We all know this. Now, if, let's say you have a bunch of Catholics. See, I always want to put this on me and try to think about what he's saying, to, of course, to be fair, to understand what he's saying. So I'd be Palestinian. Oh yeah, in terms of if a person doesn't think that Israel should be a state, it goes back to those land disputes. Yeah. I I would think that the Palestinians don't think that the Jews have a right to a state in that land, going back to the conquest of the Israelites. Well, the Israelites and their conquest of the land of Canaan. It just all goes back to that. It's the most ancient land dispute that we have in our time, and it will just always exist, plain and simple. So if you have people who, heck, like, would we say they're self-hating Americans who say, well, he's talking about people who leave their identity. So if you have Americans, so this is probably what he's saying, if you have Americans, instead of having like a national pride, you salute the American flag, you say the Pledge of Allegiance, you respect our form of government. But then we have people who get involved in more left-leaning politics, who want to get rid of all of that stuff. Excuse me. I might need a drink of water. Would we define these as self-hating Americans? They want to give land back to the Indians. They want to, abolish this. They want to get rid of that. They want to remove the American flag from things, even replace it with a multicolored one. They don't want to do the pledge. They don't want to stand. They don't want to give any kind of honor or respect to anything. Kind of like with the kneeling at the football and stuff like that. Those kinds of movements. Self-hating Americans. I don't know if they hate themselves. I would say that they've been indoctrinated in an anti-American, indoctrinated by anti-American propaganda, where there isn't any sense of national pride. So maybe that's what he's describing here. Okay? And if that's what he's describing, that makes sense. But the thing is instead of just stating, hey, that guy that you were mentioning, yeah, he's anti-Semitic, or instead of just coming out and being very explicit, oh yeah, absolutely, there are those distinctions. You love the country, you love the concept, you love the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, you appreciate the form of government that America has, but you don't really like who's the president right now, or you don't like these senators, you don't like these governors or representatives, or mayors, and so on and so forth. You can have certain individuals who are in the government who I don't appreciate their policies, or I don't like certain behaviors or certain decisions, certain policies. Yes, that distinction absolutely exists for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
You need to understand, or I shouldn't say you need to, that's not fair, and I apologize. I would hope that you understand a history and an understanding that we define what anti-Semitism is.
We define. I don't know why that rubs me wrong. I'm trying to explicitly, and I think I did earlier, because objective standards can collectively be wrong. For instance, people who are more moral relativists will say, how can one culture critique another culture, for instance? How can we do this? If you have a culture and they're cannibals, right? And we look at that and be like, yeah, eating people, when does that get fun? Wasn't it that guy who found a severed leg? Was this in California? Like a homeless guy found a severed leg and just started chewing on it. Well, what if everybody in society was like that? Is that a good society? Is that a culture you want to raise your kids in? They might eat you, but, you might eat somebody else. Right? So collectively, a group of people can get things wrong. Of course, think of the Democrats and the Republicans. They don't like each other. Right? So you could have groups of people who think incredibly different things. And, so the fact that you have a group of people who think something, so this whole idea that only we get to define what that is. But what if it's a bad definition? What if you're trying to use the definition to encompass more than it should?
And what happened on October 7th? What happened on October 7th, and I wrote an article about you in November. I don't know if you read it or not. I was told that you had, but I don't know if you did or not.
I did not.
Okay. I wish you had, and I really wish you had, because we might be in a very different place. You went on Tucker Carlson this is in November. And
okay, go ahead. I'm going to say I want to talk about that because you put that in this article, which was published just last week.
So I wrote
which that's what she's wanted to do. This whole conversation is she wanted to go line by line in this article. He doesn't want to do that.
A very specific article, and you can find it right now. And it was an personal invitation to you and for you. That despite everything else I had read or seen or heard, that my belief and my hope is that your comment of wanting to have an academics discussion about October 7th came from a place of not really realizing what October 7th was.
He's doing this again, right? He's going into this this mode, right? And it's irritating me too, where it's like, Candace, you're a really nice person. All kinds of things have happened throughout all of history, different dates and stuff like that. This is the what hit the news, the images and stuff certainly seem to have been the more recent event that provoked Israel to begin to engage in war, which makes perfect sense. Rockets are being shot at Israel a lot. That's why they have the defense system and everything. And what was saying? Oh, he goes into this mode of, Candace, you're a really good person. I don't think you have any ill intent. But I really hope that you see what you're doing is wrong. Like when she says to have an academic dialogue, do you know what I hear when someone says, hey, let's have an academic dialogue about October 7th? So when I think of academia, I think of being thorough, being meticulous, right? Being well read and well articulate on a particular subject. And then engaging in discussions with other people who also do that, right? It makes it more academic, right? That's usually the way that That's what I hear, right? And so when Candace Owens says, let's discuss everything about that event, everything surrounding it, everything that's happened since, and do so in a very thorough and meticulous kind of way, right? I see nothing offensive about the language that she's using, but he, on the other hand, he sounds like a leftist at this point in the way he's taking this. It's really weird.
October 7th is unique in recorded human history as the ugliest day of humanity.
The ugliest in all of human history. I don't remember, but did he no, he didn't premise this with I believe. He's just making a claim that it's the worst thing. So when millions of Jews are being killed and displaced and, you know, is the worst thing that has ever occurred in all of human history. Like all the people who died during... So it might not be a numbers thing for him. Okay? So obviously a lot of people died during World War I, World War II, and with abortions and everything else. You know, a lot of people die. A lot of things happen. He may be referring to the quality of it. You know, like really twisted, creepy stuff. But then he might not be too familiar with certain things that occurred under emperors in the Roman Empire, you know, or in cultures, you know, like sacrificing children, orgies, slaughtering of Christians, slaughtering of babies. King Herod basically had every child put to death in his realm who were aged 2 and younger. What does it say? You know, that, you know, there hadn't been, or you'll see this language sometimes in the Old Testament, you know, there hasn't been this much weeping and this, that, and everything else since. You know, this is the worst thing that, you know, people had ever experienced. Now, I grant that some of the people who have gone through some of these events would say, you know, this is the worst thing that I've ever experienced. You know, but to say, you know, objectively, you know, what really makes one thing worse than another. Now, I think he gives the example, you know, that, you know, they take this girl, they kill her boyfriend, and then they rape her on the dead body of the boyfriend, and then take pictures and video and send it to her parents. So that's the stuff, you know he's gonna say. And yeah, that's very creepy. But has that stuff never happened before, ever? You know? So, I don't know. It just kind of rubs me. You know, when people use absolutes or they use superlatives, right? Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of things that are going on in the world. Here, there, and everywhere else. Some places worse than others. But it's like when somebody starts using superlatives, this is the worst day, right? It's Michael Knowles says it all the time, you know, when Democrats say that the people who were trying to enter the Capitol building and kind of got chaperoned around and allowed in and this and that. This was an insurrection the worst threat, right? The worst threat against our democracy, the worst threat that we've ever experienced in the history of America, the worst that we've ever seen in this or any other republic. Or, I remember Kamala Harris, when the Haitians were coming and people were on horses, and they took that still picture to say that they were whipping the Haitians as they were trying to come over the border, so stuff like that. And they're like, this is the most racist thing that our country has ever seen. I'm like, really? First of all, they weren't whipping the Haitians. It was all wrong. The interpretation was wrong. As soon as we saw the video, it's like, no, this is people just on horses. Have you ever rode a horse with that little whip thingy? You know? And even if people on horses were whipping people, it wouldn't be the most racist thing that our country has ever seen. So when people start using those kinds of superlatives, worst, best, you know, Trump does this a lot, right? In his speech, you know, it's the worst, right? It's the worst thing. He's the worst kind of guy. Or it's the best. I'm the best. You know, the people use this rhetoric. Now, no doubt he firmly believes that, at least in his own lifetime, perhaps this is the worst thing that he has seen. Maybe. I don't know. But, yeah, I don't know.
What was done on October 7th? Taking a young woman, taking her phone to videotape her being raped on the corpse of her dead boyfriend, and then shot on it and sending that video to her parents.
Mm-hmm.
Beheading a man with a garden hoe, kicking a woman until her body parts fall off.
Gross. Yeah.
Is unique in terms of the intention to attack civilians.
Yeah. I remember a guy named Shamgar who once killed over 600 Philistines with an ox goad. I'm sure there was a quite bloody scene.
And so in November, after you made the comment on Tucker Carlson about wanting an academic discussion about how, you know, those kind of comments that you made and the ennui that you demonstrate.
Yeah, let's talk about
I wrote
that.
an article saying that I would arrange for you, there's a film, a 47-minute film by the IDF.
It's not going to change the fact that she wants to have open dialogue about the event. People need to hash that stuff out and be thorough and meticulous. Have kind of more of an academic approach to it. He's so offended that she said this. And he's like, oh, you should watch this video so you can see all this horrendous stuff. So we're not going to discuss any of that then? You're just going to show it to me?
It is not based, it is all the footage done by the Hamas terrorists of what they were doing so proudly, what they wanted to do. And that my belief was, I don't think that you quite realize that, and I would arrange for private screening for you and your friends.
Mm-hmm. Why doesn't she?
And that I would arrange that, and then have the discussion about how you feel about October 7th.
Okay,
How
so
you
I just
feel about it. All right, so we can't discuss it, or what, dude?
really would like to get to your article because I think it's important. I want to acknowledge your pain about October
Article.
7th.
Talk about the article.
You
No,
are
wait, that's not an opinion. That's not an
no,
opinion.
I didn't say opinion. I said I want to acknowledge your pain about
I apologize.
October 7th.
I apologize. I think it's an opinion. I apologize.
I didn't say that. I said
Yeah, you could tell that as he's jumping on things, he assumed what she had said. See, this happens a lot. You can tell a lot about somebody's attitude towards you or their presuppositions about what they think that you're saying when they only catch half of what you say and the rest kind of gets filled in to make it somewhat intelligible in their own mind. But that says a lot about them. He thinks that she's just an anti-Semite. But even then, about opinions, you know, here's the thing. Objectively, this could be very difficult to assess, because even if I watched the video that he mentioned, if we had video footage of everything that's ever happened, all the human sacrifices by the Aztecs and everything, just atrocities all across the board, just really wicked stuff, and we could see it and could do kind of like an objective viewing of all of it, and we can make comparisons and stuff. I mean, I could see somebody moving in the direction towards, no, I think this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Dropping a bomb on Nagasaki or Hiroshima, that's a horrible thing. Just whatever somebody would put their finger on. If you could see everything that's happened in human history, would what he's saying, how many people would put their finger on that? I don't know. I would need an objective way of assessing those sorts of things. We can look at the number of people who died. We can look at the level of depravity in the acts, right? We could do all of those sorts of things. If you ask some people, they, particularly people who are more pro-Hamas, they'll probably say the Jews' response, the nation of Israel's response to, what was it, October 7th? Yeah, I don't like calling things by dates. I like calling them by what they are, because it just colors the date. Through all of human history, you can have dates for everything. April 2nd. Like, well, what's April 2nd? Oh, you didn't read? In 586 BC, this thing happened. It's April 2nd, man. That's what we call it. I don't like the whole date thing, Like, I don't call it. I generally don't call it 9/11. I don't generally call it January 6th. I don't know. I just don't. I'm not so much on dates. When like Sheldon was trying to come up with the perfect wedding date for he kept looking at days, like historical dates on which people died or were born, or this, that, or anything else. I don't know. I steer away from the whole date thing. I don't know. It just really annoyed me when people kept saying January 6th. What? Like, because they're trying to pin that down, not to a particular time in history. They want you to think about that every single time there's a certification of the votes, right? Every single time there's a certification of the votes, January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. And it's just going to keep, it happened, we've discussed it. It doesn't have to live in my mind forever. It's like nobody was upset at the Kavanaugh hearings where people were literally outside the door of the chamber and were banging on the doors, these people weren't even doing that. Like, all right, whatever, people. But it's always been like that. You want to paint any event with a narrative using certain rhetoric to make it look like the best thing or the worst thing, as long as it's in favor of the party that's in power. Always happens. Always happens.
I want to acknowledge your opinion about October 7th, and I want to get to that because you are...
Because that's all okay.
Yeah, you're mischaracterizing what I said on Tucker Carlson, but I do have the clip, and we're going to be able to watch it. I definitely did not say I wanted to have an academic debate about October 7th. That's not what I said at all. But like I said, I have the clip. And I do also...
Yeah, academic debate would be different. This also reminds me of another idea. Several years ago, there was a discussion. It had Jordan Peterson. It sort of looked like a news kind of thing, and certain people were brought on to discuss trans issue, right? And one of the people who were asked or thought about going there to discuss things with Jordan Peterson later said that they weren't going to do it, and they wrote a letter explaining why. And they made the comment, because I don't want to legitimize, okay? I don't want to legitimize opposing ideas as if they're valid, or so this language of like valid or legitimize, I try to steer away from that terminology. Kind of like when somebody said to me, when somebody was speaking freely on Twitter, heck, they weren't even speaking freely on Twitter. They sent a private message to somebody, and then then the other person posted publicly what was said, and I'm like, well, why can't people say stuff? You know, why can't people engage in dialogue with somebody in a private message? You know, and people are like, how dare you? You know, how can you allow such a person to do this or that? And I'm like, allow? You know, I'm reading that word and I'm like, allow? You know, like somehow I have this control, you know, or this ability to like make a person do something or allow. Like, I'm just some dude on Twitter. What am I allowing? The platform could do what it wants. Allow. It's weird. People use this language. But I don't know if it had to do with C16 or not. But I do explicitly remember there were a few different people on that panel. If I recall, there was a gender study dude, which it was hard. It's hard to listen to some of those people. But yeah, this person was like, I don't even want to have a public discussion with Jordan Peterson because I don't want to legitimize those ideas. Once again, I don't use the language legitimize or valid or anything like that. Okay? When there's a discussion, or I think there's probably a distinction between an academic dialogue and academic debate. An academic debate, a formal debate, is where people are taking both sides, and we see this all the time as well. But you know, to have discussion that's thorough and meticulous, that's perfectly fine. But I wouldn't be mad, for instance. In fact, I actually prefer to watch debates, Catholic debates, theist debates. You know, I like to see the moderated time, the opening statements, the rebuttals, the cross-examination, you know, questions, and then closing statements. I think it's neat. I actually enjoy those sorts of things. But I wouldn't be mad that you would even have that would even exist if everybody always said, well, I'm not going to discuss the issue with God with anybody. I'm never going to do a formal debate, and nobody ever does a formal debate. And it just never, those things just don't exist anymore because of this mentality of, well, I don't want to talk to this person. Like, if I went into a formal debate with an atheist, okay, and the statement to defend was mine, okay, such that, you know, there is a God or something like that. Do I feel like I'm saying to the other person, hey, you got really good ideas? No. by me having the discussion. Now, see, I'm acknowledging that those ideas do exist in the minds of people, right? Those ideas, those philosophical propositions do exist in the minds of men. And men who live in society together sometimes find a clash between opposing ideas, and it could be a very healthy thing to have these academic settings where we could discuss that stuff. No matter how good or bad the ideas are involved, we can discuss those things. So when people uses this language of, no, we can't discuss those things because as soon as you enter into that room, you're acknowledging they have valid ideas. Like, what the hell does that even mean? They have ideas. I'm there to debate him because I think his ideas are wrong. I think they're bad. So what the crap are we talking about valid and legitimate? It's like what would be an example of an invalid idea? Like, an idea is an idea is an idea. So applying the language of validity is weird. Now, when I think of validity, I think of, for example, in deductive reasoning and logic, you have syllogisms, where you have a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. And there's a term that's the same in the major premise and the minor premise that links them together. And then you take the two other terms and you pull them together in the conclusion. So if it's a valid syllogism, then logically the conclusion, following the laws of logic, is correct. If the major and minor premises are correct, then logically the conclusion that flows through them in the syllogism is valid. See, a syllogism is valid when the logic works out, right? When it comes to validity, that's usually what I'm thinking of. Is this a good idea or not? Is the logic that is being used correct? But when you say, so I understand the idea of whether or not a syllogism is valid, but if a person just has an idea, right, they're just proposing a proposition on its own, it's not about validity, it's about truthfulness. If the major premise is true and the minor premise is false, then it's not a valid syllogism. But if you have an idea and you want to discuss that idea with other people who have ideas or even opposing ideas, well, what the heck is an invalid idea? Because normally when we think of validity in the terms of like marriage as a sacrament in the Catholic Church, right? A person could go through the annulment process to have their marriage evaluated to see if a valid marriage was contracted. Is it or is it not a marriage? If it's not, if it's found to be invalid, there's a statement of nullity. The church says, there was never a valid marriage here to begin with. Never was. So when somebody starts to talk about validity in relation to ideas, what would be the idea of a non-idea? That's just a blank mind? Oh, it's from Norm. Here, let me see if I can open that here.
Every day I meet somebody new, you know. This city's great because of the neighborly people, you know. I don't know. But I did meet one neighbor, interesting story, you know, that this guy just moved in, you know, next door to me. So I'm always one to meet the neighbors.
You like to chat with the neighbors.
Yeah, because, you know, so I went over to the guy, knocked on the door next door to where I live. And I say to the guy, I said, hey, I'm your new neighbor, you know, and I said, good to see you, you know, nice to nice to run into you, you know. Welcome to the neighborhood, you know. And so the guy, I said, what do you do for a living there, sir? You know, if you don't mind me asking. You know, what do you do for a living? I'm a nightclub comic, I tell the guy. So he says to me, he says, I work down at the University of Science there. He says,
That's a good school, by the way.
I can't remember the exact place.
Sure.
But he says, I'm a professor of logic. So he says, the guy says, logic. Now, what the hell is that? I never heard tell of that. He says, oh, well, he says it's a kind of a pattern of syllogistic. Well, he says it's hard to explain. He says, why don't I give you an example? So I said, fair enough. Why don't you do that? So the guy says, well, he says, let me ask you a question. He says, do you own a doghouse? So I go, yes, I do. He says, well, then that means you probably have a dog. I said, yes. He says, well, that means you're likely you have a family if you have a dog. I said, yes, I do. He said, well, then that means you got kids, you're married. I said, yes, I am. He says, well, then you're a heterosexual man. I said, yes, sir, I am. He says, well, you see, that's logic there. I asked if simply from finding out you had a doghouse, I made this series of inferences, and I found that you're a heterosexual man simply from the fact that you had a doghouse. Well, I said, good God, isn't that something?
Okay.
So I said, well, I won't waste any more of your time there, neighbor. And I said, I'll see you later.
See you around. Okay.
So I said, come by one day and have a chicken with me. So anyways, I left. So I left. So I go to get a bus, you know, to the bus stop. And I walk down to the bus stop, and I'm still thinking about this thing that happened to me, you know. And I'm standing at the bus, and no bus coming at all, you know, and 5 or 6 of us standing around, and one guy lights up a cigarette there, and he goes, as soon as you light up a cigarette, the bus comes. And he smokes the whole damn cigarette, no bus comes.
Right.
So I said to the guy, well, that theory really worked, huh? And the guy goes, well, sometimes it works. Anyways, the guy goes, what's new with you? I go, well, I had an interesting thing happen to me today. I said, I met my neighbor. And he goes, oh, yeah? I go, he had a hell of an interesting job. I said, he's a professor of logic down at the University of
Science.
And so the guy says, is that so? He says, professor of logic. He goes, what the hell is that, logic? I said, well, it's a series of something or other.
Right.
I said, I can't remember exactly, but I said, I'll give you an example if you want to hear an example. So the guy goes, all right, fair enough. So I said, let me ask you this. I said, let me ask you a question. Do you own a doghouse? And the guy goes, no, I don't own a doghouse. So the guy says, oh, yeah, you're one of them gays.
Professor of logic. Yes, it's logical, man. It's logical. You don't have a doghouse. Norm was great. He spent 4 minutes. He spent 4 minutes building that bit. Yeah, I greatly enjoyed Norm's comedy, particularly because like he you're willing to listen to the story. You're willing to go through the process with him because you know there's something coming. Except for that one time, remember? He did this really long story, and then he just stopped. And the whole point was just to subvert expectations. He's like, yeah, that's the story. Naming apples at a convention. Oh, Mike Tyson's Mysteries. He was on there, huh? Red Delicious. Yeah, that's disgraced. Oh, he's the bird, huh? They're all red and delicious. Oh, he was a pigeon, huh? You guys realize that we're only on like minute 17 of this video. And so I've been looking at this video for 2 hours and 41 minutes. And we're not even to 18 minutes yet. I'm not even sure if I want to spend more time looking at it. It's from what I have seen so far, and yeah, it's very little. You know, if I don't want like 4 3-hour videos of me just listening to these two people talk. Breakneck face. Yeah, I can never get through anything. Well, see, I think when I listened to these discussions, these were all the things that run through my mind. And there's a lot of clarification that goes into these kinds of discussions, because these two people having this discussion is I don't know if I want to say that discussions aren't very profitable, but they almost always don't really flesh out what needs to be fleshed out. I find debates, even formal debates, like what Trent Horn did with Dr. White, James White. I think he's James. I watched those, and I'm like, there's so much that hasn't been said. I don't know. I watch them, and I walk away without a lot of substance that I hadn't thought about yet myself. So I think sometimes it doesn't really work. Like for the whole first hour of this video, I just did a monologue on a single topic. I went here, I went here, I went there, you know, and even then, I feel like I'm not really covering a lot of material, but I'm talking constantly for a whole hour, just looking at this particular idea. Because usually things are multifaceted. Sometimes, like when I'm watching these two talk, it's like, oh, I see where he's going there, I see where she's going there, I see how he's not making a distinction, I see how she's making a distinction. I don't know, part of me wants to watch more, but I kind of feel like I'm just going to get a lot of the same stuff over and over again. In fact, I had hovered over here, you know, like, do Jews control Hollywood? Like, they discussed that. Like, I'm not even interested in that. What does uniquely evil mean? I mean, she's just asking him about what he said before. Or this whole stretch here about do definitions mutate? Well, we've kind of already talked about that. You know, it looks like they do end up discussing this other rabbi that I guess has been saying mean things to Candace on X. You know, or they discuss when she condemned Hamas on Tucker Carlson. It's like, I could talk about this before I don't do this video anymore. Yeah, I've heard and seen some things. Is the Hitler was okay thing? I don't think that. Here, we'll just watch the clip. Let's just see if you could see anything bad in anything that she says. Let's go back.
The question that's being asked of me is whether or not nationalism is an okay word to embrace. Let's play the clip so we can hear me in what
That
I
would be
actually
great.
said.
There are distinctions.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to look a different way. That's not, to me, that's not nationalism.
So again, we're trying there to define.
All right, so this rabbi's issue with this is that she mentioned Hitler at all. I kid you not. And she's trying to say, well, I brought it up for the reason why I said I was going to bring it up. And that was that when we think of nationalism, a lot of people think about the social nationalists in Germany. You know, was that in the 1930s or something like that? World War II. So I'm going to do something that goes beyond his critique. His critique. Okay, very good. Remembering, I don't remember exact dates. But yes, yeah, having a sense of national identity, national pride, things like that. Yeah, I didn't have any issues with anything that she said. He's mad that she even brought up Hitler, as if, well, you can't talk about this guy. Now, I do find it malicious when people call Trump Orange Hitler, stuff like that. You know, he's a fascist. He's this, that, and everything else. Well, what are you talking about? He's just, if all conservatives are fascists now, you know, it's weird. But anyways, this idea that you can't say anything good. You can't say anything good about somebody who has done something bad. I find this to be ridiculous. Okay? I don't subscribe to this. One time, many years ago, I was reading a leadership book by John Maxwell. And one of the laws of leadership was influence. He said that leadership is the ability to influence people and get them to participate. And so I remember I was talking to this girl working at this coffee house, and I said, you know what? Hitler was an example of a good leader. And obviously, you know, I got the response from her, what I had thought that I would get. And I'm like, let me explain. He had the ability to rally people behind his ideas. He cast a vision. He promoted the vision. And he kept it before the people, and he was able to influence them with speech and rhetoric and charisma and so on and so forth. And nobody would take any issue with the idea that charisma, influence, vision casting are not good qualities. Okay? Nobody would say these are not good qualities of what we think in terms of leadership, right? To think of the children, right? Nobody would question that if you were to ask somebody, what are the characteristics of a leader? They would bring up stuff like charisma, vision casting, influence. Was Hitler good at those things? Yes. If he wasn't good at those things, he wouldn't have been elected. He wouldn't have been able to do what he did, right? But this is my point, okay? Let's say Hitler had invented something. Well, that's cool. That's awesome. Let's say he did a beautiful work of art. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, it looks good. Looks like a lot of other art. For some reason, because somebody has done something horrendous, who had absolutely horrible ideas, executed them, got other people to execute them, and executed people that they had no qualities about them that help us understand how was he able to influence people like that. Well, because he had charisma, right? But it's like taboo. It's like culturally taboo that you can't recognize anything in a human being that is valuable, that is praiseworthy, because the person had done something so horrendous, so crazy and depraved and off the wall. It's like saying, hey, you know what? I think that Ted Bundy was very articulate. That's a very good quality to have. He was very articulate. Maybe he wasn't. I'm just making a point. You give credit where yes, there it is, right there. That's what I'm talking about. There you go. Yeah, he had nice hair. So I'm not crazy. It's just for some reason people think that because you've done this absolutely horrible thing that I could perhaps give another example with putting myself in the seat. Now remember, I said Hitler did horrific things, so yeah, the landing mustache. Yeah. So it's like it's kind of weird. That's what I'm talking about. We'll say that he ruined the mustache, right? Because every single time somebody sees that mustache, they automatically associate it with him, always, right? Now, technically, and this is along the lines of my argument, is people should be able to wear those mustaches all day long. It's just a mustache. Do we do the same thing with clothing, hairstyle? Heck, he spoke in the German language. You got to get rid of German too, because he gave his speeches in German. His material was made of polyester, 50% polyester, 50% cotton. Can't do that now. Here's the thing. If somebody's consistent with the principle, then every single thing he was ever really associated with has to be treated the same. Yeah. A Dungeon Man and Zelda one. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. But I think it's a culturally conditioned thing that doesn't have to be there. Once again, Hitler did horrendous things, and those things are bad and contrary to the Catholic faith. Right? But what is my point? My point is, if somebody perceives me as having done something bad, okay, let's say people attacked me because I wanted a gaming-only team called by Retro Craze. As soon as people had bad ideas in their mind about me, about one particular event, maybe a small handful of events, I'm the devil. Chambers can never do anything good here on out. His life has been completely ruined. He's just evil, always, everywhere, all the time. He's never done any good in his life. Yes, he removed his times from the leaderboards, for crying out loud. That's so evil, you know. How could I do that? I mean, it's only relevant in a few cases. Like, I got a couple of world records left. I think I got like 3 or 4 fastest times, and then there's like another 2 or 3 where I don't have the fastest time on the board, but I have the fastest console time, which does make a difference in certain cases. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, if somebody does something that people don't like, and it could be any number of things, then all his times are taken off the leaderboard. You know, we're trying to morally police. See, when I think of, this is a good example of what I mean about, like this guy gets mad that she even brought up Hitler's name. You know, it's like, well, it's contextual, and you know, we can draw distinctions. You know, let's make a list of things that Hitler has done good in his life. You know, I'm sure he's done something of value that's good. You know, and good for him, because if he didn't, he'd be worse off. You know, he would be much more demented than he already was. A nicer guy. Yeah, but this kind of draws the point out that those leaderboards are supposed to be an objective list of runs. So let's say some people are suspicious about Billy Mitchell's runs in the past. And there's really good reasons why the footage is definitely MAME produced. There's absolutely no doubt about that. It didn't function like arcade video renderings at all. We have a standard by which we can evaluate that stuff. But he's beaten all his times, or have come close to them, live on Twitch with an authentic Donkey Kong machine. That doesn't say anything about the past. It does prove that he was capable of doing it. But my point bringing up is that, yeah, I think his best Donkey Kong score that was done on Twitch should be on the Donkey Kong forum and on Twin Galaxies. Because even if, and let's put this on somebody else, if a person had cheated in the past, doesn't mean they can't do a well-verified score or time on a video game now. People might not like the person, but hey, guess what? They did this thing. And so if we want a relevant leaderboard, if we want a relevant leaderboard that accurately reflects reality, and that's the idea, right? So, I mean, you could have people in prison who got a Donkey Kong kill screen. Hey, guess what? They got a Donkey Kong kill screen on the board. But there's been too many cases where people have been removed from leaderboards simply because they are conservative, or because they made some comment or something like that. You know, that's weird. Okay, we're supposed to be verifying video game footage. We're not supposed to be policing the morality and thought of the people. You know, and so that, I think, is another example of the principle I'm trying to derive from this discussion. If Candace wants to bring up Hitler in relation to the word nationalism, because sometimes people associate the two, because Hitler was a social nationalist or a national socialist or whatever. And she wants to mention that. Okay, very well. If Hitler wanted to do good things for Germany, and he probably had good policies, he was probably liked by some at first, or may have liked some of the policies that he had. I mean, what president? Unfortunately, our politics are usually in the United States much more divided. Are there things that Trump did or said while in office I didn't like? Yeah, sure. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have some policy decisions that I thought were actually really good and was the reason why those were what he campaigned on, and that's why I voted for him. Likewise, when you have Obama or Biden in the White House, I'm not going to like many of their policy positions. I'm just not going to like certain policy positions. But that's not to say that they've never done anything that, oh yeah, I can agree with that. I thought maybe that was a decent budget proposal or a good executive order. I can't come up with any examples. You know what I mean? Now, there's been things that have been said by Biden. I'm like, yeah, he's describing that right. He'll later apologize for it and be like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But, just because you don't like a person, see, this is what happens. Person does bad thing, then people don't like person, and then now people are uncharitable in evaluating everything about the person. That's not objective or fair. If a person has done a really bad thing, like they slaughtered a bunch of people and then killed themselves, bad thing, really bad thing. Did they one time help an old lady across the street when they were in Boy Scouts at, age 10 or something like that? Hey, that's cool. That's awesome. That's nice. But yeah, there can be patterns of behavior for sure. But I'm not saying, well, this is the only bad thing they've ever done. They probably have done a series of bad things leading up to it, right? But have they never done anything good in their life? Like, never, ever? I'm just trying to make a point that if Candace wants to make a historical connection to something, or it shouldn't be off limits. Now, let me put myself in his shoes for a moment. Okay. Let's say there is a guy let's say that there's a guy who, I'm trying to think of just a random name for a dude. Let's say we have a future president from the Democratic Party, Ian. Yeah. All right, so we're going to say President Ian of the Democratic Party in the year 2050. He rounds up all the Catholics in the United States and puts them to death. Okay. I can see other Catholics, for Crossland. So President Ian does this really horrific thing to a bunch of Catholics, and then he, like years down the road, 50, 100 years, there's descendants from these atrocities, they probably want to pretend that it never existed, or they never want to hear the word Ian, because it just enrages them and makes them upset, makes them angry, something like that, because of what President Ian did to somebody's father or somebody's niece, or, well, at this point, 50, 100 years after. Yeah, there could still be like somebody's niece, somebody's grandpa, and feeling a certain way about that, and being sensitive to hearing the name Ian, or Keith. That's it. Maybe we can name this President Keith. You remember that rabbit on Hoodwinked? He's like, oh, watch out. Here comes Keith. Right? But yeah, so President Ian. And so I kind of get what he's saying, but I suppose it has to be raised that, well, could we never make a historical reference? Like never? Never, ever, ever. Now, consider, let's say, a child who later becomes Batman. His parents were murdered in an alleyway. Pearls are going all over the place. Yeah, and I'm not saying he doesn't have a point. There is there are other historical cases or events that one could use. I don't like when so many people today are called Hitler, or this is as bad or as worse as the Holocaust. And we hear these kind of comparisons, and it might be like, those jokes that sometimes people say, and be like, maybe it's too soon. You know what I mean? Let's say something really bad happened, but years down the road you can come to kind of joke about it or something like that. You can be like, it's too soon. Maybe that's the case here. So when the left engages in bringing up the Holocaust and Hitler all the time, it's overly used. It's usually not as bad as they're saying that it is. In one sense, they're making a comparison, but when people hear comparisons, they think, all right, this person is as bad as that other guy, or this guy, he doesn't seem too bad. He's got some tendencies. So are they then minimizing the other guy in the comparison? That could be problematic. That could be somebody's perspective. So I'm willing to grant to him that those kinds of comparisons, which I believe he goes on to say that he doesn't like when people make those comparisons, and I would agree, it's overly done. There's all kinds of things throughout human history that one could appeal to. Maybe something that is not recent memory could be good. But I think it also depends on exactly what it is and whose perspective it is. When Ryu got the world record in Lolo 1, he said that he destroyed the record. He said it was Hiroshima, it was Nagasaki, right? He later removed that. Or should I say that the video that he uses for his submission now edits that out. It cuts out before he goes into that, where he taunts me. Right? And I remember thinking, hey, I wonder why, if I were to put that on Twitter, be like, hey, look what this guy just did. He compared himself getting a world record in a video game to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And you would think, oh, here comes the cancel mob. Here comes, how dare he, my great grandpa died because of that, or this, that, or anything else. Nobody cared. Nobody cared that he referred to it as Nagasaki or Hiroshima. Nobody cared. That's a recent memory as well. So it's almost like there is, socially, there's kind of like this taboo for certain things. Like we were talking about Hitler's mustache, for instance. Like nobody would dare wear the same style of mustache. It's ruined for everybody for all time or something like that. But nobody cares about maybe what color tie he wore, if he even wore a tie or something. It's an interesting phenomenon that there are specific things that seem to a kind of cultural taboo thing kind of grows out of something where there's other things that are associated with the thing, and there is no taboo that grows from it. So nobody cared that he referred to his world record as like Hiroshima and Nagasaki because you destroyed the record, right? Nobody cares. There wasn't a Twitter storm or anything like that. But if you mention the Holocaust, people get upset about it. So it's what taboos take root, and which ones kind of grow out of the event as opposed to other things. What's Dresden? I don't know if I'm familiar with that. Here, I think I'm. Here, let me lower that. Yeah, we don't need that anymore. I'm kind of done with that guy. We talked about the last thing that he brings up. Oh, okay. Yeah. You see, every single time a group retaliates to something and there's war, there's going to be people who are on all kinds of different sides looking at different angles. Oh, they flattened Dresden. Killed tons of civilians. Yeah. Casualties of war, collateral damage. For the London Blitz, huh? Oh no. So as a Catholic, I'm a Catholic first, and then I'm an American, right? So I'm willing to grant national pride. There's a lot of things about the Constitution and Bill of Rights and stuff that I like and I appreciate. But philosophically, theologically, I think theology precedes politics. So for me, the reason why I am a Republican is because I'm conservative, and it's because I'm Catholic, I'm theistic. So, as a Catholic, there's the question of just war theory, which was developed a lot by Augustine, and I think Thomas Aquinas picked up just war theory. It's still in the Catechism about just war. Can a people protect themselves against genocide, for example? Can they take up arms for that? When is it prudent to retaliate? How one can retaliate? Should other methods be tried first to mitigate potential unforeseen and unnecessary outcomes? For example, Michael Knowles said recently, I think it was just from Friday, he raised the questions of proportionality, right? Which is not, they kill two of our people, we can kill two of their people. Proportionality has to do with, it has to do with the question of escalation, So if person A slaps person B stabs person A, principle of proportionality, that's way and above. That would violate a kind of just war theory kind of thing. Then there's the reasonable probability of success. Is it going to do any good? There's all kinds of principles that come into play, and a lot of times people aren't familiar with any of the principles, or they're just completely anti-war altogether. They would just, they just all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and just everybody step back and let the aggressor just slaughter and genocide, whole populations, take their land. But they couldn't defend it. Kind of thing. If these people aren't going to protect themselves, that's why I don't like the idea of pacifism at all. Because if you really stretch it to, obviously there's the error of taking things too absurd, because usually there are limiting principles that affect other principles. So, ad absurdum, that could be a fallacy when you stretch things too far. But the idea of just never taking up arms, always being passive. Imagine an aggressor just takes over the whole world, just slaughters everybody. And it's just them, Just doesn't make any sense to me. At some point, human dignity demands that we protect that dignity. That's why we have laws on the books, among other reasons. Yeah, at that point, it just reduces to might is right. People have a right to defend themselves. So there is, a proportionate kind of retaliatory response that could be given. But then we have to ask, okay, well, how long are we going to do this? Are we even remotely close to bringing it to an end? Stuff like that. Well, I think it really depends on who is giving the law, because we have natural law, and that's certainly applicable to everybody everywhere. But then we have civil law, which sometimes legislates some of those things. Sometimes it makes up its own stuff. It doesn't necessarily need to be there. Like dry towns, for instance, that are protecting the weak, right? Dry towns, they don't sell alcohol. Well, they can go somewhere else to get alcohol, but maybe they don't because it's inconvenient. And maybe they would become an alcoholic if they had more access to alcohol. And I mean, people can make that kind of argumentation. Well, let's not have alcohol at all, ever, anywhere. Even though people will still get it, they'll make it themselves. It's a natural, kind of process and how it's made and everything, people were going to get access to it. But let's say, we just never had it. You couldn't have any alcoholics. Alcoholics wouldn't exist. This is a really rough, stretched hypothetical. Okay, I know it wouldn't be. I am just making a case for, if that's what you mean by weak, people who are compulsive, people who are morally weak, they don't hold themselves accountable. So society has to do it. See, in some cases, and there we see the social doctrine, the principle of subsidiarity. You have people who should have been kept in line and raised and disciplined right. There's a lot of people in prison, for example, who probably just didn't get the corrections they needed as a youth, so now they're trying to learn that stuff the hard way as an adult. And that's where society kicks in, because dad's not around anymore. Now you got the state with the whip. You know what I mean? But that stuff should have been dealt with earlier and at a lower level. That's the principle of subsidiarity, at a lower level. So this is why I talked about this the other day with Kame. You can't legislate everything in natural law, because then you have a society that is underneath an authoritarian kind of government. That's because everything that's morally wrong has been criminalized. We're all sinners. We'd all be in prison. Society as a whole has to be a little looser, just a little looser. But we do need government is a natural part of what we are. In the home, it starts in the home. There's governance in the home. You got the father, the mother, they're governing their home. The father traditionally has been kind of like the spiritual leader, the kind of the final court of appeals kind of thing. But usually allow his wife to do whatever she wants, as long as it within reason. It would, like, you're not going to have like fights and conflicts all the time about stuff all the time. Okay, you mean weak as in money, power? I suppose you'd have to give me an example. Normally, I'm usually looking at it from like a moral standpoint. What kind of society do we want to live in? And so, the government needs to incentivize virtue, so we could become better citizens, right? And it wants to disincentivize vice, because we don't want people going off the rails. We need a society that's supportive of human flourishing. Okay, so we can grow and we can develop and learn, and we don't fall into moral depravity, and society doesn't crumble around us. But then there's the question of, well, how much of natural law do we legislate? And there's certain moral things that aren't explicit in natural law. Is that true? What would be an example of that? I don't know. A lot of morality comes down to human dignity. Like a lot of the sins, like slander and calumny, greed, jealousy, all kinds of vices that are violations of human dignity. I don't know. I guess if you were to really push and say, is there something revealed in the divine law that's not perceptible or derivative from natural law? I can't give you an example right now. Yeah, you and me both. I guess I haven't really asked that question. I haven't considered it. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. But it is interesting to me nonetheless, kind of just bridging back and then moving forward, and I can just end with this because I'm getting tired and I got to leave in an hour, and I'd like to lay down and relax a little bit. It is always interesting to me what kinds of things influence a culture. Oh, absolutely, Muck. What kind of things influence a culture? The source of those things, how charitable readings we give to things. And I think some of that really comes back to, the conversation that we observed today. How should we talk to each other? What's acceptable? Because obviously it's allowed to disagree with people on ideas and things and interpretations. Three more. Yep. See you in 3 months. That's right. A good 90 days. Yeah, so I don't have any further thoughts, I guess, on the Candace thing. I haven't seen anything that's like explicitly, yeah, let's hope not. I mean, we're back to natural law again. I haven't seen anything overtly anti-Semitic coming from Candace Owens. I don't watch her anyways. She's not my cup of tea. I don't gravitate towards her personality, and that's fine. I like people like Michael Knowles. I like his personality. He has a take on things here and there that I'm like, whatever. But I did decide to at least look into a little bit why she's not with the Daily Wire anymore, and why Shapiro didn't want to give any public response to it, and how is she being attacked? What are people saying? Is there any legitimacy to the claims that are being made? Just from watching this video and seeing this guy point out a few things, because it looks bad for removing her for disagreeing with the genocide. Oh, you mean she doesn't like the kind of retaliation against Gaza? Is that the I do remember her on Tucker Carlson. She actually played the clip in this video where she's talking about it's never a good thing for civilians to die, the innocent people to die, for children to die. And unfortunately, people have heard that and said, well, you're making a moral equivalence. Like the people who retaliate have a different moral culpability than those who initiate kind of process, which can make sense. Obviously, if a spouse hits their other spouse, there's a certain culpability on the part of the first spouse. The spouse that's retaliating is put in a very interesting position, right? Oh, are you meaning You mean 56 years of occupation of who? I'm sorry, who's doing the occupying where? So when it comes to like, I think, so I don't think that we can use the language of moral equivalence because there is a different kind of moral culpability from those who initiate to those who retaliate. But at the same time, they could be doing the same things right back. You know, like a spouse one punches spouse two punches spouse one. They've done the same thing, but the order does matter. And interestingly enough, sometimes it's not the one who initiates who gets in trouble with the law. It's the one who retaliates. Wow, the person who initiates gets to walk. I've experienced that myself. You know, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember from the Old Testament the boundaries that were set for the Israelites. Well, when they went and conquered the land of Canaan, I don't remember the actual boundaries, but I think it's as far east as Jordan, right? So it would have to be west of Jordan. But even then, the state of Israel is, you can't really equate that with the kingdom of Israel thousands of years ago. I'm not sure if that's a thing that can be equated. Let me see. So, Jerusalem. Okay. Oh, is that right? Yeah, I guess I don't know some of the details, but I can say that Jerusalem has, after that was established, that's where they built the temple. That's where they did the blood sacrifices and the worship and stuff like that. Right? But obviously, when Alexander the Great came and conquered, I'm trying to remember, I think there was a second temple that was built. I think it was Solomon's temple. So that was David's son. But there was a second temple that was built. That temple was torn down by the Romans in AD 70. So there was a temple that existed for that period of time, and there hasn't been a temple since 70 AD. Around 70 AD is when the Romans tore that down. Yeah. So there hasn't been a temple since. So and from a Christian standpoint, Jesus had basically prophesied that this was going to happen. It was a judgment against Israel, and there was probably a lot of being dispersed. You know, a lot of disbursement. This has happened a lot of times. So it's not very clear after the destruction of the temple exactly how Israel sees itself. How do the there were a lot of people who were killed at that time. The Roman soldiers came in and just with their horses and everything, and tons and tons and tons of people died. That's why Jesus prophesied that, this is coming in your generation. You need to flee to the mountains, stuff like that. I'm not as familiar. I'll be honest. I'm not as familiar with the history of the Jews in the last 2,000 years. Like, where'd they go? What'd they do? What did they think God was doing? How they understood the Mosaic Law without blood sacrifices? The state of rabbinic Judaism, and so on and so forth. I'm less familiar with that historically. I'm more familiar with Christian history. So maybe that's something I should be more aware of. It doesn't have any bearing on my theology at all, but at least from a historical standpoint, I know there were conflicts between Jews and Christians, for instance. I get that. But some aspects of the Crusades were not so good. The people who were involved in the Crusades did things that they weren't supposed to do. They did more than just get carried away. Some campaigns, like when the Muslims took over Byzantium, right? The Pope had, I guess maybe commissioned this army to go and drive them back so that the Eastern Orthodox, could still. But then the Crusaders ended up like sacking Hagia Sophia, which was the one of the most beautiful churches in the East. They did some really bad things, which is unfortunate. I suppose, just like the Inquisition, generally the point with the Crusades is, there's this encroachment that's going on, either into the churches, like people posing as priests and stuff like that, or just taking over churches and stuff. I'm sure there was some just war theory kind of contemplation that was going on. There certainly was, I would say, a closer relationship between the papacy and the Roman Emperor, even though that was in the East after Constantine. Constantinople in the East. Yeah. So it's kind of like the joke about the Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't an empire. It wasn't holy. It wasn't Roman. It's interesting to look at the relationship between the civil government at the time of the church going through, the first 1,000 years of Christianity. Very interesting, even all the way up until, the 1500s, where you had more of a rise of nation state kind of thing going on until we have our modern kind of map going on. It's very, I don't know as much as I should, because it doesn't change my theology at all. It doesn't change my understanding of the nature of the church. It's just a question of how has the church throughout the centuries related with civil authorities, stuff like that. That particular question, I have to wait till another time. But a lot of bad things happening in our world, and so we'll kind of see what those outcomes are. We're kind of, all we can do is pray and watch. I mean, I don't have any responsibility in any of that beyond that, But it is very tragic. I mean, it is very tragic. It's hard to see. It really is. Human, like sin has just been pervasive. You just see it everywhere. You know, even in the places where you would hope that there would be more saintly people. You know, it's tough to but I mean, we also expect it. We also expect it. It's part of our understanding of our fallen human nature, and we need more grace, that's for sure. Grace to perfect and elevate nature out of the mire in which it finds itself. But there's hope. Yep, there is hope. There is hope for sure. You gotta repent, yeah. That the dispositional change in the heart, humility, acknowledgement, repentance, making amends, firm resolutions, and just keep at it. That's all we have sometimes. Just keep at it. Keep throwing yourself upon the mercy of God, and if there's a little bit of virtue that I can develop this year, that'd be great. I wish I didn't have the vices that I had, but I'm also happy I don't have some of the vices that other people have that I don't. But in a real sense, we're all in this together, and hopefully well, I appreciate you coming by. Yeah, I'll be jumping off now, and I don't do the just chatting streams often. I don't claim to know everything. I'm not God, but I do have some thoughts about certain things, and open to learning about things that I don't know that are consistent with the things I already know. Expanding my knowledge that way. Every now and then I'll get pushback on something that I'm pretty well versed in, but here it's usually very civil. I'm quite generous with the bands. Just keep away the riffraff and the trolls and stuff like that, which I don't get a lot of those much anymore. I really don't, which is good, because I just report them, ban them, block them, all the good stuff. Yeah, I think some people have lost the art of dialogue and humility. I'm willing to grant that in some ways, due to my ignorance, I haven't always spoken accurately or well of something that later on I learn. I could have been more charitable, or I could have crafted it this way. I'm not beyond any of that. But when people come to me and say, "Hey, you need to change your thoughts on this. You did this bad thing," and I'm like, "No, I'm not going to be dictated by somebody else's conscience and ideologies. I need to have a firm conviction of my own norms and values, and so otherwise you're just being pushed around by everybody else. You have to have your own intellectual commitments, and you have to be ready to defend them. And if I don't have a strong defense for something, I don't feel threatened. It's like if somebody asks me a question about something, I'm not quite sure, I'm kind of fudging through an answer, and yeah, the other person could be uncharitable and say, okay, therefore you're wrong, and this is proof you should feel bad about yourself. Be like, no, not at all. Just because I don't have a thorough response doesn't mean that there isn't a response that can be given. So I don't need to feel threatened by it. You know, but anyways, thanks for watching. I'm going to jump off. I got things to do tonight. So God bless everybody. We'll see you again.